don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it.
Never tell me the odds.
The greatest idea in human history, the theory of evolution by natural selection.
You must unlearn what you have learned.
As a date with destiny. In order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive.
We're living in captivity, and it's time to break free.
Welcome to A Wilder Life with Eric Edmeades.
Imagine living a life where the voice in your head wasn't tearing you down, but lifting you up. Where stress, anxiety, and imposter syndrome didn't keep you small, but instead became signals guiding you toward growth. Imagine leading with presence and clarity instead of pressure and self-doubt. What kind of relationships would you have? What kind of work would you do? What kind of life could you create if you gave yourself the same compassion you so easily give to others? Today on A Wilder Life, I'm joined by Kamini Wood, a coach, author, and speaker who works with high-achieving professionals to break free from stress, anxiety, toxic relationships, and the weight of perfectionism. She's an advocate for conscious leadership and the power of mindset shifts and the practice of self-compassion as a gateway to freedom. Through her company, Live Joy Your Way, she's helped countless people move from surviving to thriving. This is going to be a conversation about authenticity, resilience, and what it really takes to live a joyful life. Welcome to A Wilder Life. I'm really glad to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Superb. So you're coming in from North Carolina. I'm in Estonia, so we're just quite close to each other.
You're very close, next door.
You know, I don't really like this sort of formulaic asking the same guest the same question, but there is this one question that I just do feel compelled to ask people. And it has to do with the driving force behind what they do. How do you arrive at a place where you feel drawn and driven to do what you do in the world? How did that happen?
Yeah. The honest, most transparent answer is personal experience. And what I mean by that is I was doing all the things. I was checking the boxes and running a law practice. Actually, I was kind of the operations manager of it. And I was doing all the things that were expected of me, being a mom and seeing my children start to mirror back to me a lot of people pleasing perfectionist tendencies. And in that moment, recognizing that they were learning that from me. If I want something to change for them, I'm going to need to take self-responsibility here and take a hard look at myself. And so I went through a lot of personal development in order to understand myself on this deeper level, to figure out what was going on with me, where might I have been holding myself back. And through that process, not only learned about myself and started showing up differently, but recognized that my drive and my calling was to help other people. I am naturally drawn to people and drawn to helping them live their best. And so I took that personal experience. And from a professional standpoint, I kept being drawn to helping people figure out what they needed to be successful, whatever that was for them. And I recognized that was really what I was meant to do, was to figure out a way to do this with people. And that's when I happened upon the coaching industry and recognizing I could really lean into being with people and helping them work through some of the struggles that I had. I feel like I've trained in many different modalities, but I feel like my personal experience is what also allows for such a unique perspective with the individuals that I work with, because I see them on a deeper level. The things that they're not saying, I'm seeing, because I hear the things that aren't being said, and I can understand it in a way that allows for that safety to happen. And so we can have really deep, honest conversations and help them move through it, because I've been there.
The first thing I want to touch on a little bit is the mirror that our children become. I really like that observation. I do feel, and I say this with respect, that, you know, some people either choose not to have children or unfortunately are unable to achieve that. With that acceptance, I do feel for those of us who have kids ultimately do provide the ultimate mirror for personal development, because you start to see behaviors in them and you realize that one way or the other, you've influenced those behaviors, either because they're mimicking you and mirroring you and learning from you, or you've given the antithesis. You've behaved in a way that's making them adopt an opposite frame. Some kids start smoking because their parents smoked. Other kids don't smoke because their parents smoked. And it shows up in both ways. I've had some very similar experiences like that. My dad gave me some interesting advice once where I was navigating a tricky divorce, and I had some decisions to make about what to do. And I had to balance my professional life and my parenting life. And my dad said something fascinating. He goes, well, Eric, what would you want your son to do in the same situation? And I was like, suddenly I had the answer. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
well, I wouldn't want him to be browbeaten. I wouldn't want him to be controlled. I wouldn't want him to be manipulated. I'd want him to stand up in his own masculinity and take control of his life. And then my dad's like, well, then you have to do that. So yeah, I like that
Yeah.
observation a lot. Then also, I like what you were saying about you felt drawn to help people unpack and identify what it was they needed to. My guess is you were doing this for people before you figured out that it could be a profession.
Totally. I think I was doing this probably since I was young. Truth be told, when I was 7, I envisioned just talking to people for a living. I didn't really know what that meant, but I have always been this for people. And the other thing is I've always been this for people one to one. I
Right.
really enjoy that true connection with another person. And so that's
Mm.
really how I've built my entire practice, is this one to one dynamic, because there's just this enormous amount of emotional safety that you can create when you're in that dynamic with someone.
All right. So let's go from emotional safety. One of the things we talk quite a lot about on this podcast in my book, Evolution Gap, is the weird juxtaposition we have at the moment where accepting for the fact there are many people suffering and that life is not easy for everybody, on the whole, we are living in what, from an individual basis, must be the best time in the history of Earth to be alive. I mean, let's remember that 200 years ago, we didn't have anesthetic. Just to put things in perspective, we live with a high degree of safety and security. You can walk down the street of your city pretty much without any, maybe some concern, but no fear. Like, we live in the safest times in the history of ever with the greatest levels of certainty. And yet people don't feel safe. And they are dealing with the highest levels of depression and anxiety and stress. There's more people on psychotropic drug prescription than ever before. There's more addiction. There's checking out on Netflix. Like, it seems as though the better we've made life, the harder it seems for people to live that life. And so when you talk about emotional safety, can you kind of unpack it from that perspective? Why is it that people don't feel this emotional safety despite, in reality, living in the safest times ever?
My perspective on emotional safety is it's slightly different from physical safety. Emotional safety is from the perspective of feeling that you are with somebody and can communicate and converse about the things that you're feeling and thinking without fearing any retribution. And I think what we're facing right now is, and that's what I see in so many of the people that I coach, the relationships are lacking that sense of emotional safety, where they feel that they can actually talk to the people in their life. And I'm not just talking about romantic partners, I'm talking about even family members, even in workplaces where people feel like they have to mask and they can't actually share what they're really feeling and what they're thinking. And when we do that, right, we're pushing down those emotions. And so we're not actually taking any action to move through those emotions. And so then we're seeing it play out in a lot of depression and a lot of anxiety because all of those emotions are completely unprocessed. And what I've experienced too in my own life of when I have tamped down my emotions, like anger is a great emotion, right? Like people think it's this negative emotion. We shouldn't be angry. Well, actually, if we look at anger as just an emotion, a data point, it's telling us and communicating something of value or a need is not being met. And if we can actually talk about that honestly without fearing retribution from the people in our life, from an emotional safe place, now we can work through it and we can take values-based action to work through whatever that anger is communicating to us, right? But
that makes a lot of sense.
Now we're pushing it down. And what does it turn into? It turns into resentment. It turns into rage. It turns into something else. And so now, or conversely, it amps up anxiety.
In the words of Yoda, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. But
there you go.
Something like that. I don't remember the quote exactly. But there's another twist to that you kind of popped into my head. And that is that if people don't feel safe to communicate, then what that means is they then try to communicate safely. So in other words, they mask their communication. They don't say what's really on their mind, which means their nonverbals are off. And so that means the recipient of the message knows that there's inauthenticity in the delivery. And so now they know that what they're hearing isn't an authentic truth. And so then they don't feel safe to communicate back, because if this person's not being honest with me, then how do I possibly? And in fact, here's a silly metaphor for this. It's like, hey, ChatGPT, please take my summarized thoughts and turn them into a comprehensive letter presenting my emotional state and arguments really well for the recipient. Hey, ChatGPT, please summarize all this. And I feel like people are doing that emotionally, right? So it's like, how do you break that pattern? How do you support somebody in feeling that they are safe to communicate what they're really feeling, and that they can communicate without that mask.
So the very first thing I say is in my practice is starting off with that is like our home base, the space between myself and my client. I start to create that emotional safety. So we start naming these things. Like, let's talk about those emotions. Let's talk about the thoughts that are coming up, helping my clients be able to actually voice it in a safe place. And
Right.
then part of it is building that muscle because they haven't been doing that. So we have to work on like re-energizing that muscle, relearning that muscle. It's like going to the gym, right? And so once we do that, then we also have to talk about where in our life do we need to potentially create that with our relationships, like really identifying where in our life might we want to start, maybe our closest relationships. And that is really scary for a lot of people because now they have to get brutally honest with people in their lives. And it could also mean that they actually have to start communicating boundaries around what's not okay. As a people pleaser, I have learned this, which is like, wow, I actually have to say to somebody, that makes me uncomfortable, or I don't like that, or just plain no. Those are things that I have to work with my clients on because they've masked it for so long. It's become conditioned behavior to just go along. And so it's really, we start with the basics of we have to relearn how to say. I mean, if we think about it, like 2-year-olds are so brutally honest. 3-year-olds, 5-year-olds, brutally honest. They're just like, this is what I'm thinking and this is what I'm feeling. We have to get back to a little bit of that. Sure, we have the adult version of that where we are at least respectful when we're communicating, but it is so important to remember how we can really name what we're feeling and put words to it.
There's this bizarre balance between, let's say brutal honesty and social nicety or what have you. And I've had a few friends that are, for one reason or another, they just have that radical honesty thing going on. And I have to admit that there are times when I really enjoy it. And there are times when I'm like, Jesus, really? And, I can give you a good example of this is that many years ago, I had just written my first multi-day, training program seminar type thing. And it was being promoted by a company in the United Kingdom, and they advertised 100 tickets and it sold out immediately. It was like, great launch. And I was really excited about it. And I'd never done anything like this before. And then one of my buddies wrote to me about a week before, not even a week. He wrote to me on like the Tuesday or Wednesday before the program. And he wrote to me and he says, hey, listen, I got one of the tickets to the event, but I've been on tour. I've been busy like crazy. And I just can't make it. I haven't spent enough time with my wife. And all of that I heard without injury. All of that I heard with love. And then he said, and besides which, I've been to so many seminars. I don't think I'm going to learn anything anyway. He had spent a lot of time around the Landmark Forum. He had actually worked personally for Werner Erhard for many years. And so he was in that Landmark Forum, just say it how it is, straight up. Now, I can make two arguments here. One is what he said. There was a little boy inside me that took it badly, that felt an insult from it, that was hurt by what he said. But then there was the mature version of me that said, that little boy inside me wouldn't be reacting that way if there wasn't some truth to what he was saying. And so his brutal honesty became my wake-up call. And no kidding, I barely slept for the next 3 days. I rewrote, just because of this one comment, I rewrote the entire program. I developed a game that would take over the program. And I just created something, like literally, I didn't deliver the same program at all. When I finally delivered it, and this is a little bit silly ego thing, but it's like my primary goal became, I wanted multiple people from the network to call him the week after and say, Jesus, did you ever miss out? But the truth is, as much as there was a bit of a shallow thing, there was a much deeper thing going on. And that was, he was right, that I was regurgitating, that I wasn't, as a result of his brutal honesty, it actually gave me what I needed. And by the way, we ran the program. It became the highest rated program that organization had promoted ever. And then it became my flagship program that I taught all over the world for the next 10 years. So, I feel like, on the one side, when we do this brutal honesty thing, there is that little boy or little girl inside that can get really hurt by that type of honesty. But if we are willing to be receptive to really, truly honest communication, sometimes it's our biggest opportunity for self-improvement. How can people do that? How can they, I don't even know how I did it that day. How can people make themselves more receptive so that when somebody is blunt with them, that even if they have an initial bruise from it, that they are able to use it to grow?
So I actually have done a lot of work with people with parts work. And so I actually approach what you just said. I'm hearing like loud and clear, it really is honoring both parts. So it's recognizing the younger part of you right in that moment that was wounded and allowing that to be there without judgment, but rather with some compassion, and to be able to say, wow, that really hurts. That hurts. And almost offer that younger wounded part what it needs to hear. And then also make room for this other part, the adult part that heard it in a different way, and say, okay, this is really interesting. If I were to not make it mean something about me, because that's what happens, right? We make the narrative becomes something about me. But if we sit there and say, okay, if I honor the younger part that's hurt and just say, I can hold space for that, and also say, what did the adult part hear? What might be true? And what values-based action does this adult part want to take? Now we're not victim to the comment. We actually allow space for the feelings to be there. Like, it was painful to hear. And also I can still take this values-based action, and I'm still in movement. I'm still moving towards something. And then we take that experience of the painful comment and we actually are able to continue to move ourselves forward without ignoring that it was painful. Because most of us will try to be like, okay, I'm just going to pretend that didn't hurt and I'm just going to muscle through. And it's not about that. It's about holding space for that, honoring it, but then also making room for, and what do I want to do? Like, what would be my values-based action? And for you, it sounds like that I want to deliver, the value is delivering value. And it's like, well, how am I going to do that? I'm going to go in and I'm going to redo this in the next 3 days. And I'm going to deliver something that people really feel is valuable. Yeah. So we're able to hold both parts at the same time.
I really like that. I think the inclination for a lot of people is that when they have that first reaction, the injurious part, they're like, I can't believe you said that. That was mean. The little, that part, that little boy or girl, kind of having that meltdown. It makes me think a little bit what you were saying about emotion. I agree. I don't believe in bad emotions. I do this one exercise in one of our programs where I ask the audience to list out all the good emotions. And of course, that's super easy, and joy and ecstasy and happiness and love. Then I ask them to list out all the bad emotions. And of course, it's, anger, rage, jealousy, shame. And they have the whole list of them. And then I often will say to them, well, now what I'd like you to do, let's take a look at something like shame. I'd like you to imagine somebody that that never experiences shame. And you realize that they're probably an asshole. Like,
right. Yeah.
So then you begin to realize, oh, so it's not that it's a bad emotion, it's that it's an uncomfortable emotion, and that it's there to guide me, to get me. In fact, one of the metaphors I like for this is I like to imagine emotions as a team of horses. And you can jump on joy and you can go for a ride, and it's like super fun and it's super amazing. But if you jump on anger, that's a hell of a ride, and you can accomplish a lot, and it can teach you a lot, but you might not get where you thought you were going. One of the thoughts I have about that is, okay, we want to accept that we're going to have these emotional responses, and we want to accept that they're not bad emotions. But I think we could also agree, though, that some of those emotions are not great to be communicating from.
100%. Absolutely. I'm a firm believer in allowing your emotions to be there, but also it is so important to regulate your nervous system and get to a place of groundedness before we communicate. As a parent, this is something I've really worked on, right? Because I think parents struggle with this. Something happens and we immediately go into communicating with our kids. And what happens is we're communicating from a very emotionally charged place. And oftentimes we'll say things that we don't mean. And here's the truth. Kids, whoever we are, not just kids, we cannot unhear things that are said to us. Repair can be made, but the person on the receiving end cannot unhear what is said. And as
especially
a parent,
when
that
they're
is something.
So young.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm always aware that when they're that young, they have so little life experience to compare what you said with that they just record it. They just go,
totally.
That must be a new rule that I'm living with.
And they make it mean something, right?
Yeah.
I know that now that I've done all this personal development and reflection, I can remember certain things that I was told as a 7-8-year-old. I'm like, holy crap, I made that mean this.
Oh my God.
And I didn't have the capacity to, as a 7-year-old, to figure out that that's not what that meant. And then it started running a narrative. As a parent, it is radical. I mean, it is responsibility for us to I do coach some parents. And one of the things that I often say is we've got to regulate ourselves first before communicating to our kids, regardless of age. I've got teenagers and adult children now. And it's just like, that is my rule of thumb. I need to regulate me before I have a conversation about something with them.
My very good friend, Shelley Lufko, who's very interested in parenting, child advocacy, and so on. And she says, I like the way she says, when you're having an interaction with a child, the primary consideration should be what meaning will the child create from this interaction? Not what am I trying to say, meaning about themselves, about their relationships, about their life. And that, that really landed with me. And I have the craziest, silly story about this, but many, many years ago, I mean, I'm young, I don't even know how old, 6 or 7 or something like that. And I go to the kitchen, I grab an apple, and I'm eating the apple, but then suddenly I realize that I need to go to the bathroom. So I go into the bathroom and I put the apple up on, there's like a little shelf by the medicine cabinet, the apple there. And then I go and I do my business and I flush and I wash my hands, of course. And then I pick up the apple and I come out. Now, my mom happens to be passing by and all she hears is the toilet flush. And, then the next thing you know, her little boy walks out with an apple. So in her mind, I'm eating in the bathroom. He's in the middle of stuff, being an adult. And she says to me, Eric, you can't do that. And I go, what? She goes, you can't eat an apple when you're going to the bathroom. That's dangerous. And I'm like, it's dangerous? And then she gets adult distracted by whatever, and we don't finish the conversation.
Mhm.
And of course, now as an adult, I know what she meant was, she was just like, it's not the best place. There's germs and stuff. Did you wash your hands? And so, but as a child, all I had was, you can't do that. It's dangerous. And I walked away and I'm like, it's dangerous? Like, what do you mean dangerous? Like, how is it dangerous? I don't understand how it's dangerous. And of course, she's busy being an adult and I'm being a kid. And so over the next few weeks, even, I find myself pondering the danger. And I hate admitting this, but one day we're sitting in school and we're doing that thing, where you play with straws and you block the top of the straw and you can lift the liquid out. And I'm doing that and I'm thinking about the physics of it. And I'm like, oh, so if I block the bottom of the straw, the liquid stays in. If I block the top of the straw, the liquid stays in. If I block the top and the bottom, the liquid stays in. But if I open the top and the bottom, the liquid pumps out. Suddenly it occurs to me that if you were to swallow while you were pooping, you would be opening the top and the bottom of the straw, and you might just slip right out of yourself. Like, I'm like 6 years old, and now I'm terrified. Somehow I was dispelled or disavowed of this, but it really showed me like kids are bloody literal. And
Yes.
so you tell them stuff and they believe you. And so if you tell them stuff when
Yep.
you're angry,
They're going to
you gotta be
believe you.
careful.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So help me with something. I think that I'm medium good at this most of the time. And matter of fact, as far as parenting goes, I think I'm very good at this. I don't speak to my children angry. I just don't do that. But I can say that there are other areas in my life where I'm not as good at that, where I can feel that I've slipped into anger and I don't have that same censorship. With my children, I really do.
Mm-hmm.
My little girl walked into the house one day. We were all sitting outside, and I heard a smashing, and I walk in, and she's probably about 6 at the time, and I walk in, and she's standing amongst all the camera and electronics gear because we were filming in the studio at that point. And I see instantly what's happened is that she's dropped a water bottle, one of our WildFit branded water bottles, and she's dropped it and it's hit the floor and it's exploded. And there's glass and water everywhere and electricity everywhere. And I look at her and I hear my dad's voice in my head.
Mm-hmm.
Not a good one. The one he would have had. And I gratefully I censor it. It's not who I am. And I simply say to her, hey, baby, what were you thinking with the big bottle, with the water? And thank God, because what happened was she goes, well, I didn't feel like I could bring enough water for the whole table in a glass. And so everything that happened was out of her own sense of generosity and consideration and compassion for other people. Thank God I didn't yell at her, because then the neural connection she makes is generosity gets me in trouble. I'm grateful but I know that I'm not always that good in, say, other situations. So I'm asking you're working with clients and you're saying, hey, okay, we want to acknowledge the emotion, but we want to also recognize that emotion might not be the best emotion to communicate from. How do you support your clients in learning how to not to do that? You understand the question?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. And you're right. I think there are different relationships. We could be really good in one relationship, really well censored and somewhat in control of, like you were mentioning, as a parent, but not with other people. What I routinely talk to people about is this concept of radical self-responsibility, right? We're going to actually radically own the fact that we're not in a great place. We're emotionally charged, and then communicate to the other person, I'm going to need a minute. I think so often we feel like we've got to just address the thing right then and there. And part of it is recognizing that if we want to effectively communicate, part of effective communication is owning the fact that we're not going to communicate from an emotionally charged place, and to take a moment to communicate and say, I'm going to need a moment and I want to come back to this. self-responsibility and integrity, and come back to the conversation. Because what happens is immediately we go into these conversations with people, and again, we say things that we can't take back. And those are the things that can really leave marks on people. It happens at, you mentioned that I work with a lot of people coming out of toxic relationships. This is a constant that we deal with, which is there's so much that's said and people are bruised by that. They're bruises we don't see. And so we have to have this idea of radical self-responsibility. I mean, I talk about this even with conscious leadership. It's about owning what's happening for me. Wow, I'm emotionally charged. I'm going to own that. And I'm going to communicate that I need a minute to come back to this conversation.
Yeah. And I think that with parents, I think one way of navigating that is because often one parent might still be a parent and the other one might not be a parent in that moment, if you get me, right?
Totally. Yep.
And I think, I mean, I've noticed that my wife and I have a pretty good cadence with this, is that sometimes she can get, say, angry with, with one of our daughters. And, and then sometimes I'll just turn to her and I'm like, okay, now we're not helping the situation. And she looks at me, she goes like, I can see, she's like, I need to say the things I'm saying right now.
Right.
But we've created that cadence where we reckon, I would do the same for her, that, what we recognize, it's a bit like driving. If one of you is drunk or angry, you shouldn't be parenting.
Right.
I think so much of what's difficult in society at the moment is that misregulation. I think you're also first generation. You're an immigrant, right? Like,
well, my parents immigrated. I'm first generation.
I'm an actual immigrant. I'm not even first generation. I'm an actual immigrant. And what's funny is I feel like when you're either an immigrant or first generation, like young, like I was, and you come into the country and you do get to absorb a lot of the culture, but you also come in recognizing that it is a culture, not the culture. And that's not, people who have lived here their whole lives or lived in their country their whole lives tend to accept theirs. I had this experience the other day. I'm in New Jersey. I'm in Newark Airport. And my wife and we're on separate P&R, so we have to check in separately. So we want to check in at the same time to make sure we get our seats together. So we walk up to the machines and I walk up to mine, she walks up to hers. But this woman just slices in front of me and I go, excuse me, we're together, I know, but we're trying to get, and she's just nasty. I shouldn't have said it, but I just go, wow, welcome to America. And of course, what I mean is I'm not American and I'm a guest. And maybe you should be a little, but here's the joke. She's African American. She assumed that I'm some right-wing racist nut bar that is accusing her of not being from here. So she loses it with me. She's like, I am American. And I turn to her and go, I am so sorry. That was my point, is that you're American and I'm not. And she goes, oh, I'm sorry. And it's like, it was so fascinating that, you can just make one unconscious comment that leads into somebody else's beliefs and then they're unconscious. And the next thing you know, you're having a meltdown. So I really like that. I like the thought you're having, the way you're putting that is like, you need to actually recognize you're in the wrong state and say, I need a minute. And sometimes it's just a minute. And then I also like the idea, I think in parenting, that a little bit of a parenting pact can be, hey, if you ever notice that I'm parenting while drunk or angry or whatever that thing is, maybe you can steer me on track.
Yeah, reel me back.
I like that a lot. When you are dealing with, I think that your primary focus is high performance, working with people that are at the leading edge, they're doing big things and so on. I think that sometimes those are the hardest people. I know that I am one of the hardest people in the world to coach that way. It's really strange. I'm super teachable and I'm super coachable in the right environment. But the minute somebody tries to like accountability coach me, I know that I'm not as receptive. So I'm curious, as you're dealing largely with high performance people that are achieving a lot in the world, that are generally super smart, super driven, how do you establish that coaching relationship so that you can work with them on emotional regulation and stuff? How do you get there?
My first priority is always to create that relationship and that rapport, right? And to recognize most high performers, there is an element of having utmost respect for who they are and how they show up, right? And so paying attention in those first few sessions around, where are their sticking points? Because most high performers, they're highly successful and they've gotten there because of pushing themselves and probably for the most part, actually ignoring how they feel. So I know if I just jump right into, let's talk about those feelings and let's make room for them, they're not going to feel safe because the conditioned behaviors, we don't pay attention to that. So I have to have respect for how they have had that success. And so creating that environment where I am receptive to how they're showing up and recognizing, I get that this is how you've had your success. It's scary as all get out for you to even think about putting down, take your foot off the gas. And they're like, heck no, that means that I'm not going to succeed ever again in my life.
Yeah,
I know that because that was something I was scared of. If I don't push on all cylinders, if I'm not working constantly, what's going to happen? Like everything's going to fall apart. So first of all, I know it because I operate the same way, but having respect for that mentality allows for me to have different types of conversations and to create the room for instance, you're saying I'm, coach me on accountability and I shut down or I'm not receptive to it. Well, right. So instead it's about meeting the person in front of me. And this is where I feel like is kind of a superpower, is meeting that person and finding a different way in and talking about it in a different way. So we're not calling it accountability. We're calling it something different. My client is hearing it in a different way that they are receptive to it. And that's why I say, like, I'm not a cookie cutter coach where it's like, here's the plan. We're just going to go do this plan. It's, I'm going to be with you and I'm going to figure out and hear from you how and what works for you so that then I can assimilate and figure out a way for us to have that conversation where that transformation can actually happen.
Yeah. I think that anybody at the very top of their career, their business or what have you, they didn't get there. They are not the result of cookie cutters. So you're going to have to create that more modified approach. One of the things that I understand from your work is that you tend to approach what some people might call emotional dysregulation or psychological dysfunction rather than as a pathology or as something that's wrong, as something that's just not understood. And frankly, I take a very similar approach, both with physical health and with psychological health, that generally it is not, like, we don't regard diabetes as a disease. We regard it as a repetitive stress disorder that can be recovered from if you change the behavior that started in the first place. So it seems like we take a similar view on that. My lens is evolutionary biology. I'm going, you're firing these neurotransmitters in a Paleolithic way because of this. And so it's not that you're broken, it's that you're misfiring. So we have a similar thought process. I'm curious what your mechanism is. Like, you now have somebody who's dealing with that type of stuff. How do you help them to spot or to reframe it as from dysfunction to lack of understanding?
Yeah. And that's something I really hold in high regard. I tell every single person that I talk to that, I do not pathologize. I believe that, diagnosis has its place. Absolutely. So I'm not saying that that's not the case, but for me and my work, it is not about fixing a problem. It is about creating a space of understanding. So as an example, individuals with an eating disorder, right? I take the approach of this, if we go into this with the idea that we need to create an understanding of what's happening here. So like, as an example, I'm working with a client right now who binge eats. And, originally it was, well, I need to fix this problem. I need to just stop binge eating. And I said, well, we could come up with ways to do that, but that's not going to be long-term because there's not this understanding of what is leading to that behavior, right? The behavior is the binge eating, but we're going to create space to understand what is happening behind the scenes, helping clients understand that they're not broken, right? That's part of it, which is releasing shame, right? Because shame says that there's something wrong with me. So we start there and then we start asking curious questions, so for instance, with the binge eating, it's not just about the binge eating, it's understanding the context of when that happens and what's happening for me emotionally at that time. Am I dysregulated? Am I having anxiety? Am I, feeling out of control? That happens with people who have restrictive eating. Sometimes that's the thing that we notice is the pattern is when things are all over the place, they start to really just hone in on controlling how much they're eating because that gives them a sense of ownership and control. Once we're understanding that, now we can start taking action to fill that need in a different way.
Yeah, I can understand that. It's funny, I never intended to get involved in treating or coaching or dealing with eating disorders. It happened by accident. When I launched WildFit, which is our food coaching company, it was really simply about ending diet culture. It was about making it possible for people to never go on diets again, giving them the right nutritional and metabolic information they needed and the right psychological tools so that they could break free of all that. And one of my team, who'd worked in the diet and fitness industry before, came up to me and goes, well, what are we going to do when people come to us with eating disorders? And I go, well, those aren't our people. We're not doing that. Because you don't understand. They're going to come to us because when they find out how effective this is, people with eating disorders are always looking for the next thing. They're going to, I said, no, we're not advertising for that. We're not, and we will even ask in the intake, do you have an eating disorder so that we can filter it out? It's not our thing. I don't want that kind of liability. Of course,
Right.
what happened is that people would come in with eating disorders, they would decline, and then they would come in and do our programs. But what was shocking was that we would then, in the final weeks of the program, we'd have people writing to us going, I came in actively bulimic and I'm not anymore. I came in anorexic and I'm not anymore. I came in, and I'm not anymore. And I was like, okay, why? What did we do? And in a weird way, part of what we did was we didn't acknowledge the disorder because they didn't tell us. So what we did is we just worked on improving their relationship with food. We improved
Right.
on improving their nutrition. The ironic thing is a lot of our aberrant behaviors are amplified by the aberrant behavior. So if you're eating junk and purging it, then you're malnourished, which means you're starving to death, which means you have cravings, which means you have to. So
Right.
it was
Right.
really weird. So just by going to the front of the cause of the situation without even dealing with the psychological stuff, just simply saying, what if you were well nourished? It was amazing how that turned
Mm-hmm.
around. So I like that approach a lot. We approach emotions in kind of a similar way, that in the same way you said, there's no bad emotion. One of the things that I would suggest is that some of our emotions are evolved for living in nature, and now we don't live in nature. And so those same emotions fire, but they fire in a time, in a location, in a setting, which is just hardly appropriate. And I think that kind of admits that same thing. Let's not pathologize. Like, this is not a disease. It's just the wrong time.
And so my way through that is I wholeheartedly believe in compassionate curiosity, right? Just let's get curious about it. Let's ask some questions. And then you can see your way through it. Because then you get to this place of, okay, this is just the wrong time. Like that
Mhm.
emotion, that's not something that I need to necessarily utilize. I mean, we talk about this with negativity bias all the time. The whole concept of the fight or flight. It's like we perceive something as a threat, and really it's not a threat, but the way that we're conditioned and the evolutionary part of our brains, our amygdala starts firing and we're like, oh my gosh, we're going to die. And we just have to re-regulate. So to your point, I think sometimes we do have some emotions that just don't make sense. But instead of saying like there's something wrong with me, we
Yeah.
just ask some questions about it and just understand
Yeah.
it. And through that understanding, take a different action.
Yeah, I think very often people see that stuff happening and then they think that they're broken in some way. It's like, I have sugar cravings, therefore I'm broken. No, you're a
Yeah.
Homo sapien. Like, that's part of the deal. You
Yeah.
can deal with them, but it's part of the deal. And I think that silly example, you worked in a law office, but you receive a thick summons. And what are you going to start doing? You're going to produce adrenaline,
Yep.
noradrenaline. You're going to produce all
Yep.
that stuff. And
Yep.
all of that stuff is designed to save you from physical danger. The real mastery happens when you realize, I probably shouldn't read this with adrenaline in my.
I'm going to put this down and walk away and come back to this.
All right, this is excellent. Now, how do you work? I know you work one-on-one with people. Do you have courses, books? Like, how can people engage with you, generally speaking?
Yeah, so I do work with people one-on-one. I also have an app. So I do have some mini courses that are available from my app. And then I have created some ebooks and things like that for, people who want some information but aren't ready
Yeah.
to necessarily jump into a full one-to-one coaching opportunity. But if, people wanted to just learn more, my website is kaminiwood.com. And of course, I'm on the socials. My handles, it's authentic me. So, they can just get a feel for the different opportunities in order to connect.
That's excellent. We'll make sure that we share those in the show notes and make sure people can connect with you. Let me wrap up with one final thing, and that is that we are living in a very interesting set of times at the moment. I don't think that I've ever seen the level of division, derision, families even being split apart by ideology. And then AI is just what people thought they had for jobs. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of angst and pain and difficulty in the world. And yet at the same time, we've never lived with more safety and opportunity. This is a very bizarre time. And so I guess my question for you is, you've got a bunch of these high performing leaders out there that might need to work with somebody like you. What's your message to them? How do they know that they might need help? Because I can tell you, I am the last person to recognize that I need help. I am the
Mm-hmm.
first person to say, I've got this, I'll handle this, I'm going to do this on my own. And sometimes it takes a pretty big, shocking knock from the universe for me to go, turns out I might need help. You're now speaking to those high performers that are out there
Mm-hmm.
making stuff happen. How do they know that maybe they need some help? And what advice might you give them to begin that journey?
I would say that for a lot of high performers, it's so funny you said the statement, I've got this. Generally speaking, I will say that those, because I said the same thing. It's to really pay attention to when I say I've got this. Am I well, how does my body feel? Am I tense when I say I've got this? Because a lot of times when we say I've got this, we're actually muscling through. And so oftentimes it's that moment when we say I've got this, that it really, we're inviting a check-in. Is this more like I'm pushing through, or am I really actually okay? Because some of us are in the moment. We're actually really fine. But I would say high performers, hands down, we are so known to constantly use that term. I've got this. It's fine. It's fine is the other one. Those are the moments to really ask the questions, really, what's going on here? Am I fine? And to be frank, most of us as humans, we all need support.
Yeah.
So the moment that we're saying, I'm totally fine on my own, is usually an invitation to say, is that really true? The other thing that I would say too is checking in with how are you doing from a, energy level, because I think a lot of high performers are pushing, and they don't pay attention to the fact that like they're either feeling stagnant or they are tired. And they're just like, it's fine. Those little messages, those are telling us like, hey, I might need some support. I might need to actually unpack what's going on here. It is so hard for high performers to ask for help, right? Because we really have been conditioned to be like, I'm going to figure this out. And it's just to recognize that there's no failure in asking for support.
I think that there is one challenge, and that is that, we've all been sold the superhero myth, right? So it's like, feeling like we have to be self-reliant, we have to be the hero and all that kind of stuff. And then I think the other challenge is the sort of frog in the hot water thing that's going on, is that you don't notice it creeping up. You don't notice the tiredness creeping up or the stress creeping up. And then unfortunately for many people, it suddenly hits as burnout or breakdown. Of course, decided what your next book should be. And it should be, the title should be, I've got this. And then the subtitle in brackets is, no, you bloody don't.
I love that.
Go register the domain immediately before I do. Listen. It has just been a real treat to have you here tonight for me, today for you. I really enjoyed that a lot. I'll make sure that we put your contact details in the show notes and such. Keep doing what you're doing. And thank you for making the time to come and meet with us here on A Wilder Life. I appreciate it a lot.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, everybody, another insightful, interesting conversation. I really do want you to think about that. Every time you say to yourself, I've got this, every time you say to yourself, I'm fine, maybe you should ask the next question, is that true? Do I really have this, or could I use a little help? And I think that the most important skill that I've really developed in the last 5 or 7 years of my life is actually being willing to accept, and even sometimes asking for help when I need it. So I hope you got some powerful ideas from this episode. I want you to like and subscribe. If you know somebody who says they've got this, that says that they're fine when you know they're not, please share the episode with them. In the meantime, stay wild. Thanks for tuning in to A Wilder Life. I'll see you on our very next adventure together.